Welcome, everyone. This is Greg Rock, and I'm glad to have you for the latest in our webcast series. Today's webcast is going to be focused on tips to simplify and speed up your business process diagramming, hosted by the folks at Microsoft, and featuring Scott Helmers, Microsoft Visio MVP, Vice President and Partner at Harvard Computing Group, and also the author of Visio 2010 Step by Step. I've got a few quick announcements, and we're going to get right underway with today's webcast. Our webcast series is one of the ways in which BPM Institute promotes education, awareness around business process management. We do that through our website, our training programs, and a lot of original content that you'll find on our main website. We've also just updated our learning paths for 2010. You can find recommended learning paths here by role for business process management professionals, yourself and your colleagues. And that's also available on our brand new website that we've just released for 2010, and we hope you have an opportunity to explore that. Without further delay, I'm going to turn things over to Scott Helmers. And Scott, we're thrilled to have you down, and glad that the folks at Microsoft were able to host this session. We find at the Institute that Visio is still probably the most pervasive modeling tool in the community. But it's not uncommon when we go in and are conducting training sessions that we'll have folks come to those training classes with 3 or 4 different versions of Visio. So I thought it would be a great theme to help folks to understand, why they should consider Visio 2010, what new capabilities are available in that, and it sounds like you're the perfect guy to answer those questions for our community, and so we're thrilled to have you.
Well, thank you, Greg. I appreciate that, and I know exactly what you mean. Wherever I go, I find people still using Visio 2003 or different companies that might even have a mix of different versions of Visio all in use at the same time within the company. So what I will do is, in fact, focus on Visio 2010 and show you some of the key features that I think you will find will make Visio 2010 a very attractive choice. As you mentioned, Greg, I am a Visio MVP, have been for 4 years now. I've been working in the IT industry for a couple of decades. I've got quite a bit of experience both on the consulting side, working for software vendors. I have been both on the technology side and the business side at various times, and throughout all of that, while being an active practitioner of in various areas, I've also continued to teach regularly throughout. The last dozen years or so, I've focused mostly on business process-related matters. So at the Harvard Computing Group, we work with clients to help them document their business processes, often with an eye toward analyzing and improving them to improve their overall operations. One outgrowth of that focus on business process led us to create a product called TaskMap, which is a Visio add-in designed specifically for making it very easy to document work processes, and equally importantly, to make it very easy for anyone to pick up a process map and be able to read it. As you also mentioned, I am the author just a year ago of Visio 2010 Step by Step from Microsoft Press. What Microsoft tried to accomplish with Visio 2010 is emphasized on the right side of this slide. The key goals were to allow you to build diagrams more easily, to simplify the way in which you went about adding shapes to pages, rearranging, and creating a truly useful business diagram. They also wanted to make it easier than ever to connect your diagrams to business data, whether it was in a SQL database, a SharePoint list, an Excel diagram, or something, an Excel spreadsheet, or something else, and to take advantage of that data in a variety of ways that we'll explore during this session. And finally, a key goal was to allow you to share your data-rich business diagrams with a wider audience, well beyond the people who have Visio, in fact, extending data-rich and dynamically updatable diagrams to anyone with a web browser. On the left side of the screen, you see 3 editions of Visio 2010. Now, previous versions of Visio had 2 editions, Standard and Professional. Visio 2010 introduces Premium. Most of the focus in Visio Premium is around business process, and so much of what I'll be showing you today is part of Visio Premium. In terms of agenda, I'm going to show you some sample diagrams, just a couple of quick ones, and then we'll jump into the business process modeling notation, and specifically version 1.2 of the standard, which is embodied in the template and stencil that are included with Visio 2010. I'll have a few words to say about BPMN 2.0 as well. We'll take a look at those three editions, and I'll compare and contrast them for you in a quick way that will give you a sense of which edition might be the right one for you. I will, throughout, be demonstrating a variety of techniques that will allow you to build and rearrange and organize diagrams much more effectively. We will look at data very significantly and a significant part of what Visio 2010 makes even easier to do. We'll look at visualization. How do you take this data-rich diagram you've got and present data in ways that is instantly usable and usable by different audiences at different times? We'll explore Visio Services, a part of SharePoint 2010, and that's the mechanism that allows us to create data-rich, dynamically updatable diagrams that anyone with a web browser can read. And toward the end, we'll take a quick look at SharePoint workflow. It's now possible in Visio 2010 to lay out a workflow graphically in Visio, export it to SharePoint, and actually execute that workflow using SharePoint workflow. Throughout all of this, I'm hoping that at least once, and I hope several times during the course of the session, there will be those moments when you say, wow, I didn't realize I could do that with Visio, because there is so much more in Visio 2010 that you can now do with Visio. All right, let's move to a couple of sample diagrams, and then we'll jump into BPMN. So I'm going to switch to Visio, and I'm going to ignore the diagram for a moment. I want to talk about the user interface. If you've not seen Visio 2010 yet, you can immediately see that it looks different, and indeed, Visio 2010 is the first version of Visio to actually use the ribbon user interface that other parts of the Office suite have used for a number of years now. On the Home tab, you'll find all of the key functions that you'll use. In fact, you'll find that in many diagram types, 70 or 80% of what you do, you'll probably do right from the buttons that are on the Home tab. But when you need to venture beyond that, there's the Insert tab. This allows you to insert pictures and callouts and other kinds of objects into a Visio diagram. The Design tab lets you change the appearance of the diagram. And here's a very cool part of Visio 2010. You notice when I hover over any of these the themes rather, there's live preview. So Visio 2010 supports this in a number of different ways, everything from changing a font size to completely changing the appearance of a diagram. That live preview is a very handy feature. Also on the Design tab, we can insert backgrounds, we can insert borders and titles. You'll see numerous examples of those things on the diagrams I'll be showing you. On the Data tab, which we'll use quite a bit later in the session, we will link to data, we'll visualize data, and take advantage of a number of data-related capabilities. The Process tab, which is unique to the Premium edition of Visio, allows us to do some interesting BPMN things. We can create sub-processes. This is where the SharePoint workflow functions are, so we'll come back to this tab a couple of times. The Review tab is very similar to its purpose in other parts of the Microsoft Office suite for things like spell check. A key button here in Visio on the Review tab is this one that says Shape Reports. Because shapes can contain data, you want to be able to get that data out, and one of the traditional ways in Visio that's still here in Visio 2010 is to run a report. And there are a variety of pre-built reports. You can also define your own. On the View tab, we can change what appears on the user interface. Notice some checkboxes for turning various options on or off. We can also switch windows. You notice the different diagrams that I have open here inside Visio at the moment are all available. I do want to point out one of the nice things the Visio design team did and development team did is to include a Switch Windows button down in the lower right-hand corner. I'm just going to zoom in down there in the lower right, and you'll see that the Switch Windows button is right here. I'm hovering over it now, and you'll see that I can click on it and display that list of Visio diagrams that are all open here in Visio. So you don't even have to go to the tab in order to get that function. Let me turn the magnifier off. Excuse me. The Developer tab is not necessarily visible. By default, it's not, but I've turned it on. I would actually prefer if this were called the Power User tab, because you don't have to be a software developer to take advantage of some of the functions that are here. I'm not going to go into very many of them today, but I'll just show you that if you click File, this takes you to the Backstage view, common to all the Office applications now. If you select Options and Customize Ribbon, then just add a check mark next to Developer, and that will turn the Developer tab on. Now, This diagram also shows another tab called a cross-functional flowchart tab. This brings up a point. There are three different kinds of tabs in the Visio user interface. There are the permanent tabs, home, insert, design, data, and so forth. Those are always present. This particular one, cross-functional flowchart, appears because this happens to be a cross-functional flowchart, and there's some extra add-in software that drives some of the functions of a swim lane diagram or cross-functional flowchart. If I switch to a different type of diagram, like this one, you notice the cross-functional flowchart tab is gone. If I switch back, it reappears. So those are add-in tabs, and different add-ins will have different tabs. You'll see them sometimes in various drawing types. There's also a third type of tab that applies in a specific context. If I click on the BPM Institute logo that's down at the bottom of my diagram, notice that there's a green tab called Picture Tools that appears. This is an image, and consequently, in this context, we need some image tools, image-related tools, and that's what this toolbar presents. If I click on the background and away from that image, then that toolbar goes away. And there are a variety of other contextual tabs that you'll sometimes see in Visio as well. Before I get to the diagram, one last bit, and that relates to the stencil window. You'll find that it behaves differently and much more nicely in Visio 2010. In the past, when you clicked on a header to open a different stencil that's visible here in the stencil window, things dropped to the bottom of the window. It was kind of, well, to be honest, it was a little unusual and a little awkward. Now, notice that just clicking on a tab, the headers stay in place and the stencil opens just as you would hope it would. You can minimize the stencil window, another nice feature that's new, so that if you're familiar with the shapes and you don't need descriptions, just minimize it. It takes up as little space as possible. You can still drag shapes from that minimized stencil onto your drawing. And speaking of the drawing, let's now zoom in on a part of this drawing. So this is a swim lane diagram. It's, to be honest, kind of boring. It's just got some shapes with text on them. One of the things that we can do with diagrams in Visio is visualize the data. So I'm going to go to the Data tab, and I'll show you how to create these graphics in a moment. But right now I'm just going to use a couple of existing graphics, click the Data Graphics button, and I'm going to select all the shapes first. Control A, select all the shapes. Now I'm going to click on the Data Graphics button and click on a data graphic. Visio transforms this diagram by applying a predetermined set of ways to display the data about the shapes. And if we zoom in a little bit further, you can see some green bars that are different lengths. We've got what look like some warning indicators. Different tasks are different colors. That's all great, but I don't know what those colors and things mean. Guess what? Visio 2010 even lets me build a legend for my graphics just with a click of a button. Click Insert Legend. I get a choice of horizontal or vertical. Visio drops it in the upper right corner of the diagram, and I'm going to move it down a little bit here so we can see it and the page. And lo and behold, I see that the tasks that are the reddish color are those that we are already in the process of improving. The ones that are the golden color are tasks that we've marked for investigation. We're looking into ways that we might improve those. And we can also see that the time in days is measured as the length of the green bar. So that's the execution time for each of the tasks within this process. And we also have the warning symbols. We can see that those appear when the number of execution days exceeds certain thresholds. So this is a much more usable diagram, and I can get much more value from this diagram. And this is only one example of a way in which I might present the data about this diagram. A second quick example before we get to BPMN, this happens to be an example using TaskMap, the software that I mentioned a moment ago that Harvard Computing Group created. This is a unique way to represent a business process by displaying data. Now, I happen to have data graphics turned on, and I have a few more turned on that I probably would in real life because it makes the diagram look a little cluttered, but I want to show you some of the ideas that are possible here. The triangle and the yellow triangle and the green diamond represent risks and controls, respectively. So we can see at a glance where we've identified risks associated with the task and where we've put controls in place to mitigate those risks. The red arrows represent time thresholds. So we've set a threshold, and those arrows mark the tasks that exceed a time threshold. The diamond in the top center of some tasks indicates that that task is a decision. Now, if you want to see this diagram without the extra data graphics, we can just select no data graphic, turn them off, And now we see a view of a task map without data graphics. Quick aside, as you can guess, part of our philosophy in designing task map was make data visible. And so for any given task, you'll see that there are guidelines and resources and people acting in supporting roles, timing information that can be displayed as a matter of course for any task in your process. So those are a couple of the sample diagrams just to give you a sort of big picture overview of what's possible. Now let's get to BPMN. Now, this particular drawing is a fictitious process, but one that's easy to imagine might exist, where we want to provide tickets for a corporate event that's coming up. So let's zoom in a little bit here. We are using BPMN shapes from the BPMN stencil that's included with Visio 2010. I'm looking currently at the basic shapes template, stencil, that shows me the shapes that you'll probably use for 80+ % of the BPMN diagrams you create. But if you want to see every possible variation of the event shape type, or the activities, or the gateways, in fact, let's make this stencil window even wider so we can see more of the shapes that are in each stencil, connecting objects and so forth. So we've got lots of different shapes here, as well as the core set in the basic shapes stencil. Another thing that's important to understand about the BPMN implementation in Visio is that the shapes that you see on the page are actually quite intelligent. Indeed, each of these shapes can take on multiple forms. This is a task with a person in the upper right-hand corner, so it's a user task. This is a task that has a gear. This is a system task. But indeed, if I right-click on this shape, go up to task type, notice it's currently set to user, I can change that to, say, service, and it now shows a gear. So these are chameleon shapes, if you will. They can take on different forms based on what values you choose. So I can set that back to user. Similarly, this task, performed by a user, is a loop, represented by the arrow here. And how did that happen? Well, we right-clicked, and we set loop to standard rather than none. So let me change it, and you'll see that that loop symbol disappears. All of that happens because of the intelligence in the shapes and the data in the shapes. Let me open the shape data window and click on a shape. And you'll see, if I expand the size of the window a little bit, you'll see that we have lots of data here, including the very data we've been talking about. So for this particular shape, we have a loop type set to none. Well, here's a second way that I can make a change to the shape. I can come into the shape data window and just choose standard, and now we see the standard loop notation. So you've got a lot of flexibility here in creating your diagrams and altering the shapes. You can use specific shapes from the stencils, or you can just drop a shape and alter it on the screen. Now, as far as this particular process is concerned, pretty straightforward. We get a ticket order, we check seat inventory. If seats are available, we print tickets, and then we either send or hold them. If seats are not available, then somebody offers the patron alternate seats. If they accept those alternate seats, then we print and send or hold. If they do not accept alternate seats, then the order is canceled. So pretty basic process, but you know what? There's a problem right here in this part of the process. And now I want to show you a pretty interesting and very helpful capability in Visio 2010, and specifically on the Process tab. The challenge in this part of the diagram is that print tickets and send or hold tickets really doesn't tell the whole story. I need to define this part of the process more. For example, why are we printing tickets? What about e-tickets? Well, that might work for some people, not others. What's this send or hold? That sounds like there needs to be a decision there about whether we're going to send or hold the tickets. I could add more shapes to this page and build out the rest of this diagram on this page, but let's just say I like this page the way it is. What I really want to do is define a sub-process for fulfilling the order. So I've selected these two shapes. Up on the Process tab, notice that it's a sub-process group. Several functions are grayed out, not available right at this moment. But I'm going to click the one that is, that says Create from Selection. When I do that, notice the shapes disappear, and I now have a new shape, a sub-process shape with the plus sign as appropriate for BPMN. I'm going to call this shape Fulfill Order, and now this page is great just the way it is. Notice what happens when I hover over this shape, though, the new shape. There's an attachment to the cursor that looks like a hyperlink, and the text says Control-click to follow link. What Visio actually did is replace those symbols, add a page, and now when I Control-click, it takes me to that page. So it's that easy, one click, to create a sub-process. And by the way, that little menu, that sort of mini toolbar that popped up, this is another feature of Visio 2010 that makes it very easy to change line styles, colors, text sizes, and fonts, and so forth. What I'm going to do is make this process more complete, this sub-process more complete, by adding a start event, because a good sub-process should have both a start and an end. So I'm going to drag a start onto the page. Here's another bit of Visio 2010 that's new. Notice the orange lines that appear. This is the enhanced dynamic grid by name. For me, it's just a bunch of orange lines that save me a whole lot of work later on. I can position new shapes relative to old shapes, top, bottom, center. Let's go with center. Notice when I get this to a certain position, there are some double-headed arrows that appear below the shapes. Those tell me visually that the current position of this shape is equidistantly spaced from print tickets, as print tickets is from sender hold tickets. So if I move it away, nope, those arrows go away. When I'm here, I know it's good. So I'm locked in right now in exactly the position I want this shape to be. I don't have to come back later and tinker with it. Another enhancement, I see these little blue arrows that appear above and below and to the left and right. I'm just going to click one, and automatically Visio fires an arrow across to print tickets. Now that similar functionality existed in Visio 2007, but it's even more usable, and we'll see another variation on that theme in just a moment here. Here's a very cool thing. I mentioned, do I want to print tickets or do I want to use e-tickets? Well, that sounds like a decision. We need a gateway. Let me drag this onto the screen. Now, in the old days, what you'd need to do is manually move these shapes, make room, fit the decision in, add a link. Well, watch this. I'm just going to drag this gateway down on top of that link. Notice both ends light up in red. And as soon as I let go of the mouse button, how about that? Visio actually made room, added another link, basically broke the link that was the connector that was there, added a new one, and I now have my decision. So what am I going to do here? I'm going to decide whether print or e-tickets, and this will be the path I choose if I'm going to print. Let's follow that through to the right. So I'm going to print tickets now, and let's just make a little bit more room so we can see for the word print. I'm going to print tickets. Now, after printing tickets, there's going to be a decision. Do I send or hold? So guess what? I need another decision. Let's do the same thing. Just drop this here. Visio makes room for it. This is now a decision about whether there are more than 7 days before the event. So that's my decision criteria. If the answer is yes, then I'm going to edit this text so it says send tickets. So if we have more than a week, we'll send the tickets. If we don't, we need to do something different. Back to the decision. Now, I mentioned there was more behind these little triangles than there used to be, and that's this Quick Shapes menu. You notice that you see 4 shapes here, and I get live preview as I select each one. Those 4 shapes are the top 4 shapes above this little gray line over in the stencil. These are what are called the quick shapes, and I can rearrange them if I want a different shape to appear, or if I want them to appear in a different order, I can just drag them within the stencil. But the whole idea is it saves me time. I don't have to go back to the stencil to drag a new shape onto the page. All I have to do is click, and I now have the task that I'm going to call hold tickets. So let's type hold tickets, and we'll label this no, there is not more than 7 days. And now I'm going to add an end. So let's end this process. Do the same thing. I'm going to come over here, and I've got what looks like an end, and I put it on the page. But now, if any of you know BPMN, or those of you who do, you know that's actually an intermediate event. Well, here's another bit of evidence about the chameleon nature of these shapes. I'm going to right-click and choose Event Type, and notice I can just change this from an intermediate to an end event simply with that right-click, or by going into the Shape Data window. So far, so good. I want to connect this hold tickets. Oh, one more thing. This is actually, just to be good about this, to create well-formed BPMN diagrams, I'm going to add a bit of text here. So I'm going to say this is the state when the order is fulfilled. So now I have a label on my on my end shape. What I would also like to do, though, is indicate that after I hold the tickets, the process ends. And if I hover here, I'm going to get something that Visio will try to add for me. I can pick a shape, but that's not what I want to do. I want to connect whole tickets to the end shape. So here's another thing you can do with these cool little blue diamonds. Just click on it and drag. And notice that I can drag directly to any other shape. So I've just glued that connector on. Now, for aesthetic reasons, I'd probably want to move this guy down a little bit, so let's do that. Notice this new style of callout moves right with that shape. That's a feature that you don't have in previous versions of Visio. Just to finish this diagram, I want to show you one or two more nice features in Visio 2010. I'll use a couple of them that we've already talked about. I'll use the quick shapes here, and in this case, I'm going to send an email confirmation because now we're on the path for e-tickets. So we'll send that confirmation. This is the e-tickets branch. And we're good. I'm going to use that same feature once again, but you know what? I'm going to move this guy down first, and let's drag from the auto-connect arrow and link it in over here. So now we've got a pretty good representation of the work involved in the fulfillment part of this ticketing process for our corporate event. A couple of quick things. I want to show you that while we can automatically add, and let me just drag one more task in here, Visio is pretty clever. It will actually move whole sections of the diagram. How about that? It doesn't just move a task or two out of the way, but it will actually move whole sections. If I delete that same shape, it self-heals that line. So it took two lines and merged them into one. One other thing that's useful to know, let me go to a full-page view. And by the way, quick difference. In Visio 2010, Control-Shift-W, W for whole page, brings you to whole page. In previous versions of Visio, it was just Control-W for whole page. That's something that took me a little getting used to, and it may take you some getting used to as well, but it does work. Control-Shift-W. Another part of Visio 2010 that's very handy is the ability of Visio to automatically add pages or expand your page size. What if I add a task or drag this particular end shape over to the canvas? Well, let me do Control-Shift-W. Guess what? Our page is now twice as wide as it was a moment ago. If I drag this shape down below, let's not just the text, let's Control-Z to undo. Let's grab the whole shape, and let's drag it down here. Control-Shift-W to see the whole page. The page is now 4 times the size that it was just a moment ago. And by the way, the auto-expand has its counterpart in auto-reduce. If I drag this guy back up here, the page shrinks, and the same way with this one. If I drag it back, the page shrinks as well. So you can increase the drawing page size very easily. You used to have to do that manually. Now it's just automatic. All right. Well, that gives you some ideas about some of what you can do with BPMN in Visio. I'm going to go back to just show you a slide here and point out that while Visio 2010 comes with BPMN 1.2, there are a number of vendors that have implemented Visio add-ins, templates, and stencils for BPMN 2.0. Now, I haven't personally used any of the 4 of these, but these are 4 of the more common free BPMN 2.0 stencils and templates that are available for Visio. So I'd suggest if you're interested in BPMN 2.0, you don't have to wait. You can go download these things right now. Let's now talk about the differences among the various Visio editions. I mentioned Standard, Professional, and Premium a few minutes ago. In the case of Visio Standard, there are 6 categories of templates that are available in the product, and across those 6 categories, there are 24 different templates. Each template, of course, has its own collection of stencils and shapes that are in those stencils. If you move to Visio Professional, what you'll find is 2 additional categories, an engineering category and a software and database category. And spread across these 8 categories, there are now 62 templates. So there's a huge increase from 24 to 62 in the number of templates. And keep in mind, because those templates all have stencils, many of them, there are hundreds and hundreds of shapes that are available for you in Visio Professional that are not part of Visio Standard. And then if we look at Visio Premium, we have the same 8 template categories. There are now 65 instead of 62 templates. Now, that's not a huge difference in number, in fact, only 3. All of them are business process focused, since that is the primary focus of Visio Premium. Specifically, you have a BPMN template, the SharePoint workflow template, and one for Six Sigma that are part of Visio Premium. There are also a number of other functions that we'll be taking a look at it. So it's not just a difference in 3 templates. There are some additional software capabilities in Visio Premium as well. Now, just to represent the differences among the 3 graphically, and by the way, I don't expect that you can read all the text on this diagram. That's not important. What you just look at the colors. The blue boxes across the top represent the 8 template categories. The green boxes down below represent templates that are included with a particular edition. The red indicates those that are not included. So this is what Visio Standard looks like. Here's Visio Professional, lots more templates, as a point I've already made. And, of course, Visio Premium includes everything. Now, I borrowed these with permission from Chris Roth, the Visio guy. If you haven't ever been to visguy.com, I highly recommend that you take a look. There's everything you'd ever want to know about Visio. Chris does an amazing job of writing articles and collecting useful information and tips and whatnot about all different editions and versions of Visio. Let's move now to a series of flowcharts, and I'm actually going to use variations of the same human resources flowchart to show you data and data visualization and some of the remaining parts of the demonstrations for today. Before I do that, one last slide. Some of the parts of the upcoming demonstrations take advantage of SharePoint, specifically SharePoint 2010, and something called Visio services and Excel services. These are services provided by SharePoint that allow you to store Visio and Excel diagrams in interesting and accessible ways. So for what I'm demonstrating today, I'm actually using Office 365. So I've got a SharePoint out in the cloud, and I will be using Visio services and Excel services. Back to Visio. Let's switch to the first flowchart. Now, this one does not involve any data that I care about, so I'm going to shut the Shapes data window temporarily. I want to show you some of the ways that Visio can help you take an existing diagram and make it better. This particular version of this human resources flowchart has a border and title. You notice that I put the Visio logo over here in the upper right-hand corner. I've got a title on it. There's a date and a page number at the bottom. So that was done simply by going to the Design tab and inserting a particular border and title. If you want to change it, just pick a different one, and you'll have a different one available. I've also applied a particular theme to add some color to this chart. Well, looking at this, it's starting to look pretty good, but you know what? These shapes on the top row aren't really lined up very well. So let's select the shapes in the top row, go to the Home tab, and on the Position button, there's a function called Auto Align. Now, you notice a bunch of stuff moved around on the page when I hover over this. The shapes that I selected moved, and some of the others did as well. That may or may not be what you want. This is Visio's best guess at how to align what you've selected and a little bit more. I'm going to go down a little further. I'm going to experiment with aligned middle, top, and bottom. Notice the live preview. They're now aligned at the bottom, the middle, and the top. So, you know, I like middle, so I'm going to go with that. Once again, live preview is a big advantage in letting you decide before you click what you'd like to see as an end result. Now that did a nice job of aligning my shapes, but the spacing is pretty irregular. Can we do anything about that? Well, sure. Look back to Position. There's an auto space function that, once again, notice when I go on it and off of it, it moves a bunch of stuff around. It may be what I want or maybe more than I want. If I want to only affect those shapes that I've selected, I'm now going to choose Distribute Horizontally. Now, what this function does, and this is not new in this version of Visio, but the live preview makes it easier to use. Among the selected shapes, the outermost ones will stay in place, and Distribute Horizontally repositions the interior ones, so in fact the spacing is equidistant among those shapes. I could go ahead and do the same sort of thing with the shapes at the bottom of the page, but I think you get the idea that it is easier now with the position functions that are available in the live preview to fix up your diagram and make it look better. But what if I have, and let's go to another variation of this diagram, what if I have one that needs a lot of work? Notice there's a different background here, different theme, but actually this one doesn't need a lot of work. It looks like it's pretty good right now. it was messed up a little bit. Let's do that. Let's move some things around so that it's got some issues, some challenges. There we go. So that's what it was going to look like at the outset. Well, I could rearrange things in the way that you've already seen, but there's what some of us refer to as the magic button here in Visio 2010. This button that says Auto Align in Space. One click, and look at that. Visio has rearranged my diagram to make it pretty presentable. Is it exactly what I want? Well, maybe, maybe not, but let me Control Z to undo just so you can see that again. I can auto-align in space, and it will do a pretty good guess at making things putting things in a good order and arranging the lines. Now, I might want to fix a few things. I might want to move this line down, and maybe I want to move this line down as well. It's text. I might want to rearrange these two shapes. For some reason, I don't know why it rearranged the position of those shapes. I've just made it a little bit worse. Let's try it once again. It took a good shot. Often this works really nicely. Sometimes you need to do a little bit more afterwards. Well, let's go back to just a couple more Control Z's here to undo and go back to a reasonable representation of this diagram. The next thing I'd like to do is show you how we can view the data that's in this diagram. Let me turn on, by going to the Data tab, I can turn on the Shape Data window, and you can see there's just a little bit of data in each of these shapes. There is a cost, and there is a status that shows whether that task is complete or not. How can I represent that data, picture that data? Well, I'm going to go to the Data Graphics button and create a new data graphic. Now, a quick bit of terminology here. A data graphic can contain one or more graphic items. Each graphic item can display one piece of data in a particular way. So let's add a graphic item. Click New Item. First thing you do is choose a field, and I'll choose the cost field. Second, you indicate how you would like that data to be displayed, as text, a data bar, or the other choices that you see here. And I'll show you a couple of these. I'll start with text. There are a variety of predefined ways to display text. I'm going to pick this particular one. It's got some color, and it's going to display a value in the middle. Click OK. Click OK again. Now, let's select all the shapes on the page, Control A, and let's apply that data graphic. One click, and it's now done that. Well, you know what? That's really not very helpful because the graphic is displayed to the side of the tasks, and it's buried behind some of the other tasks. So let's quickly edit that. Let's take this, edit, and double-click to edit this graphic item. Rather than using that somewhat unusable default positioning, let's position this so that horizontally it's in the center of the shape, and vertically it's below the shape. So it's below. Click OK. Click OK. And that looks much better. So how's that? We've got the cost data displayed for each shape on the page in a little blue bar. We'll apply different colors. Those data bars will change the colors as well. So that's one example. A second example, if I go back to create a new data graphic, I'm going to choose the same cost field. This time I'm going to choose a data bar. Now, this is a variety of really interesting ways to display data that has a range of values. So numerical data works best here. I'm going to choose the thermometer. And I'm going to indicate the range of values. My costs can range from $0 to $150. I will change the position so that this thermometer will appear on the left side and at the bottom edge, and click OK. And click OK again. Now, let's select everything and apply this data graphic. Again, a very, very useful way to give a visual impression of what's what in this diagram. There are also the third category. I'm not going to take the time to do that one right now, but if I chose the cost field, for example, let me back out and do that again. Create new data graphic. If I choose the cost field, I could display this as an icon set. There are little collections of 5 icons that you can choose, set values, and have those icons appear based on the data values. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a different field. I'm going to choose the status field, and I'm going to create a color by value graphic. Now, I love this color by value concept here. What Visio has done is look at my drawing, and it's looked at all of the values that are in the status field. It sees 3 and some shapes that have a blank value, and it's assigned colors. I don't want to color shapes that have a no value, so I'm going to click delete and only leave the 3 statuses that you see here. Now, I think the colors Visio chose are a little garish, so I'm going to choose some other colors, maybe a light blue, sort of a turquoise color, and a green color. And now I'm going to click OK. OK once again. Finally, let's select everything, and let's apply that new data graphic. What you're looking at now is really effective. This is the colors of the shapes changed to represent the status. So we can see that completed tasks have the blue shape, the blue color, excuse me. In progress tasks are that sort of turquoise color, and the not started ones are the ones that are green. If you change the data values, the shapes will update, the colors will update automatically. So this is a very powerful way to create dashboards, for example, that reflect the current state of a process or the current state of the data in parts of your process. Next, I'm going to, oh, and by the way, I mentioned data graphic legends once before. What if you don't remember what these colors mean? Well, remember, it's as easy as insert legend, and now we can see that blue is completed and so forth. So the legend is always available for any data graphics that you create. Next diagram sample, same flowchart, but this time it has some errors in it. Well, what kind of errors? I can't really tell by looking at it. I don't see anything that looks particularly wrong, but on the Process tab in Visio 2010, there is the Check Diagram button. When I click that, Visio opens a window that shows me the errors. And I can see that the connector is not glued at both ends. And indeed, notice Visio has selected that connector. Let's go up to the diagram and zoom in, and we'll see that particular connector. You know, even from this zoom level, it looks like it's connected, but you know what? Let's zoom in a little further, and we can see that, indeed, it's not connected. If we go in far enough, the end is blue instead of red. So let's glue it on, and now let's rerun the check diagram. That error message went away. There's another error here. Flowchart does not end with a start shape. You know what? I've looked at this flowchart so many times that I didn't even notice that. Let's zoom out a little bit. And sure enough, we've got hire candidate, but no end shape. There's also a second error message that highlights the hire candidate shape and says, flowchart does not have an outgoing connector. Well, indeed, those are two reflections of the same error, the fact that we forgot to put an end shape. So let me hover, use the quick shapes and auto connect, and let's add an end shape. Rerun the check diagram, and indeed those errors went away. We have another one here that's complaining about no outgoing connector, but you know what? That's a document shape, and it really shouldn't have one. So let's do this. I'm going to right-click and ignore. Now, there's an important difference between ignore this issue and ignore rule. If I select ignore this issue, then this error for this particular shape will go away. Will be put into the ignore bucket. If I choose ignore rule, then Visio will no longer check this diagram for a lack of outgoing connectors. So what I want is just the first, the ignore this issue. If you look at the bottom of the screen on the status line, you'll see that there are 2 active issues and 1 that's been ignored. So Visio keeps track for me of those things that I've ignored. Here's flowchart shape has no text label. Well, you know what? For that document, that's okay. Let's ignore that one also. This one says, oh, you look at that. You've got no label on your end shape. So let's add one. Let's select the shape and type end and rerun the error check, and we're good. We have no more issues. We still have 2 ignored issues, and that's fine. If I want to see them, all I have to do is right-click anywhere in this window and show ignored issues. So I can see that they're still there if that's important at some point. Once my diagram is good, I can close it, and we're in fine shape at this point. All right, next diagram. Once again, a variation on this same flowchart, but this one was created in Visio 2007. No themes, no nothing. It's pretty basic, but my bigger issue with it at the moment is it was created in Visio 2007. Visio 2007 knows nothing about diagram validation. But what if I now have Visio 2010 and I have a library of Visio 2007 or 2003 flowcharts and I'd like to validate them? No problem. All I do, come up to the check diagram button, and rules to check shows there are no rules in this document, but I can import rules. I can import rules from any open diagram, or Visio always offers the choice of flowchart rules. Because so many people use Visio for flowcharts, it's very easy to select flowchart rule set, one rule set copied to the current document. Now let's run the rule. Check diagram, and guess what? We have a couple of issues, and most of them are the same ones that we already saw that relate to this shape, so we could ignore those, and we can fix the diagram. But the nice thing is, here's a diagram I created 6 months or 9 years ago. I can take advantage of the power of validating the diagram by importing a rule set. There's a flowchart rule set. There's a separate rule set for BPMN diagrams. There's a rule set for SharePoint workflow diagrams, for Six Sigma diagrams, and a variety of other diagram types as well. And because the check diagram function is on the Process tab, just keep in mind that this is only available in Visio Premium. One quick note, by the way, if you go to Amazon or any other online retailer or talk to whomever it is from whom you buy your Visio licenses, you'll find that Microsoft has dropped the prices on the pricing of Visio Premium. It used to be $999, considerably more than either standard or professional. But when I looked at Amazon last week, the price of Visio Premium was actually the same or even a couple of dollars less than professional. So if you're looking for Visio Premium, this appears to be a good time to go look and acquire it. Okay, next, let's build a diagram from data. So now let's get into the data functions a bit. Here's a blank page. It's going to be a flowchart. It's going to be similar to that flowchart we've been working with already, but I'm starting with a blank page. But you know what? I've got some data. Let me go over to my SharePoint site here. This is the TaskMap SharePoint website. There's flowchart data here. If I just click, we can see what that data looks like. This is an Excel file, as you can see. We have a unique shape number for each row. We have descriptions, status, and so forth, and cost data. So this is nothing more than an Excel spreadsheet that happens to be stored out in SharePoint. The diagram then, first thing we're going to do is link it to that SharePoint list, or that Excel file in SharePoint. Go to the Data tab, click Link Data to Shapes. Notice that I can link to a wide variety of data sources, SharePoint lists directly, almost any kind of database. I'm going to stick with Excel. Click Next. I could browse, but in my case I happen to have that taskmap.sharepoint.com site and that flowchart data right here on my recently used list, so I'll select that, click Next. What Visio now shows me is a list of the names of the tabs, the sheets within that Excel workbook, and there's only one in this particular case, so I click Next. This is a very important dialog. Visio is showing me the field it's identified as most likely to be a unique value for each row of data in this spreadsheet, database, SharePoint list, whatever the case may be. In my experience, Visio is actually pretty good at guessing what the right field is to use. But there are a couple of ways you can control this if you want to. Perhaps your data does not have one value that uniquely represents each row, but you need two values, or more value. You can add check marks here, notice. Or if you simply want to use the ordinal position in the list as the unique ID, you can do that as well. But for my data, shape number is exactly the right choice. So I will click Next and click Finish. Now, if you have Visio 2007 Professional and you've used the external data window, you now recognize what you've got here. If you haven't seen it before, this is another window that opens in this case and reflects the data. And you'll see that it looks exactly like what was in that Excel workbook, a shape number, description, and so forth. How do I build a diagram from data? Well, I have a couple of choices. What I'm going to do first is I know that this shape number 1 is the start shape. So I'm going to go over here and click on Start Shape. I could drag the start shape onto the page and then drag the row of data on top of it, and that works fine. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do it all at once. By selecting the start shape and then dragging this row of data, I get a shape that contains data. Let's zoom in on that part of the diagram, and let's open the shape data window. And sure enough, you can see that this start shape has data in it, exactly the same as this row of data. The next shape happens to be a process, so I'm going to click once on the process shape to activate it, and now I can drag a process shape onto the page. Let's do the same thing again with the next row. It's also a process shape, so I can drag it. And notice I'm using the dynamic feedback to get these things positioned exactly the way I want them, right when I put them on the page, so I don't have to go back and fudge them later, nudge them up and down, and so forth. And one more on this row, and that completes that first row of my flowchart. Now for the second row, I just want to show you that you can actually drag more than one row at once. I can select multiple rows, as I've just done using Shift-Click, and drop them onto the page. This drops both of the tasks. Each one is linked to its corresponding data. So here's task 6, and here's task 7. Just to quickly complete this, I've got task number 8 is actually the decision, so I'll drop that, and then I have one more process shape and one more, and then finally the end shape. So you can see it's really easy to build your diagram out and accomplish a lot of work in just a moment or two by having a blank page and a set of data that you want to use. At this point, with my data in place, I can close the external data window. The connection to the data is still there. That's a very important point. We have not broken the link. All we've done is close the window. If you want to see it again, just put a check mark next to external data window, or uncheck it. And by the way, as you'll see in the next diagram, if I change the data in the diagram can be updated as well. One last quick note, what I would probably do to finish this diagram off is I would use the little auto-connect arrows if I want to, or I can go back to the Home tab, select the Connector tool, and just drag and drop connectors as fast as I can click, click, click from shape to shape. All right, let's go to a little bit different use of data. I've got another diagram here, same flowchart, and I'm deliberately using the same one so you don't have to worry about the content of the diagram, but rather the cool features that I want to show you. In this case, what I want to do is start exactly the same way. I want to link to that same data. So I'm going to link data to shapes, click Next, browse to or use the recently used Excel spreadsheet, Next, shape number is correct, and Finish. So now I have my data. Let's zoom in on the diagram so we can see that I can add the data by dragging a row onto an existing shape. It doesn't matter what shape is selected in the stencil when you do this. When I drag the row of data onto the shape, it will match accordingly. Notice the colors changed. Just hold that in the back of your mind for a moment. I'll come back to that in a minute. And I can do that again with another shape and another shape. But you know what? I'm kind of lazy. I don't want to do this row by row by row. I'd rather have Visio do it for me. Right now, I don't have the means to do that because the shapes that I've already added data to have a field called shape number, but notice these shapes don't have a field called shape number. But you know what? We can fix that. This is a long-time add-in in Visio that I'm about to use. I'm going to go to the View tab, click Add-ons, and in the Visio Extras category is a Number Shapes utility. This is a really handy little add-on. I'll just go with the defaults here, which basically says start with 1, and actually, you know what, I've already got shapes number 1, 2, and 3, so let's start with 3. Whoops, I already have 1, 2, 3. Let's start with 4. I'll get it right. And then click OK. And now, every time I click on a shape, it will have a number assigned to it. So let's go. Look at that. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Close this window. Now, what we've got is a situation where the unlinked shapes have a unique ID, and the data has a unique ID. How do we convince Visio to use that information? We do this. We go to the Data tab, we click Automatically Link, and a little wizard pops up that says, what would you like to do? Do you want to apply data to just the selected shapes? Well, that's only one shape. No, let's go with all shapes on the page. Let's click Next. Visio now asks me, which column in the data window at the bottom should we use as the unique value, and what I want is shape number, there it is, and next I want the same field name, shape number, in the shape. So the field called shape number in the data will be matched with the field called shape number in the shapes on the page. Click Next, click Finish, and instantly, notice not only did these little hyperlink symbols or chain link symbols appear, but these shapes changed color. Now let me come back and talk about why that happened. That happened because the default for data graphics is to apply the most recently used data graphic whenever you link a shape to data. So what we see automatically is a view of this process that shows the status of each task based on the data values. Even better, keep in mind this is linked to that Excel spreadsheet. So let's go back to SharePoint, and this time let's not just open that data and look at it, but let's actually edit this data in Microsoft Excel. I get a warning that says, are you sure you really want to do this? And yes, I'm quite confident I do. So let's look at Excel. So here's my data. The first 3 tasks show as completed, the next 2 show as in progress, the next are not started. And indeed, that's exactly what, if I go back to Visio, that's exactly what's reflected here. Let's insert our legend so we can see that. I'll move it down here so it's near the diagram. And by the way, I'm going to close the external data window because we really don't need to see that, and that will let us focus a little bit more on the data. There we go. So we can see that that matches. 3 are blue, 2 are green, and the remaining 5 are the light blue color, indicating that they haven't started yet. Back to our data in Excel, let's indicate that by copying in progress down to a couple more shapes here, that 6, 7, and 8 are now in progress, and let's indicate by copying completed into tasks 4 and 5 that those 2 are now completed. So we have a bunch that are completed, a couple in progress, and a couple still not started. I'm going to save my changes, go back to Visio, and I now have 2 alternatives for updating my drawing. The one I'm going to choose first is click on Data Graphics, and click to the left of Data Graphics on the button that cleverly says Refresh All, and watch what happens. Refresh, and as soon as that refresh happens, notice the colors have already changed in the background. Close this dialog, and we can see the first 5 tasks now show as completed, 3 that are in progress, and only 2 that have not yet been started. So this is a live update. I've done it manually, but I can also set a timer. If you have the external data window open, just right-click in the external data window. Let's just do that. Right-click, choose Configure Refresh, and I can set a timer. I can update every 60 minutes, every 1 minute, every 5 hours, whatever time interval is appropriate. If you think about this, this is really pretty nice because you can turn your diagram into a pretty effective dashboard and use it for a variety of purposes to see what's going on. Not just to show how the process should be done, but you can see how the process is being done. And this is a good segue to our next topic, which is to talk about sharing diagrams using Visio services. I've got this diagram here. I'm going to save the changes that I've made to it. But the next thing I want to do is I actually want to publish this drawing to Visio services on SharePoint. To do that, I just click File and Save and Send. And right in the Save and Send category is a button that says Save to SharePoint. And you can notice that I can click to a variety of recent locations, including my SharePoint website. I'll use that one. Or I can browse to a new location. And I can save my diagram in 2 different formats. I can either save it as a Visio drawing, or I can save it in this new VDW format. And that's the one I'm going to choose. This is the data refreshable drawing type that is visible with any web browser. Click Save As. And the Save As dialog opens. It is set to the appropriate folder on my SharePoint website. And I'm going to save this diagram with the same name and that VDW file type. And click Save. Now what this does is create a web browser version of this diagram. And it's now going to open automatically here. Here it is. Let me enable data refresh. This looks exactly like it does in Visio. In fact, let's go back to Visio. There's the diagram in Visio. there's the diagram in Visio services as displayed in my web browser. This works with any, excuse me, any web browser that supports Silverlight. So this will work with Firefox and Safari and other browsers as well. Now, is this truly dynamic? Well, there's several things about it are dynamic. One, I can just click on it and move the diagram around. I can zoom in and zoom out, much the way I can in Visio. In fact, I can even use the control mouse wheel, which works in Visio and works here as well, to change the zoom level. If I had more than one page, I've got a table of contents drop down here to go to another page, and I can even see the data. Well, let me fit back to Zoom. I can open this little window, and just like the shape data window in Visio, it allows me to see the data for a shape, including not just the data, but if I had hyperlinks on any of these shapes, I would see those appear as well. So I can see the data this way. Well, what if I, and by the way, notice that the data graphics were applied, and we see those as well. So let's take 2 steps back. Let's go back to the data source. Let's go back to Excel, and let's change task 8 from, or rather task 9 from not started to in progress. So I've just made one simple change here. Task 9 has now been marked as in progress. I'm going to save the changes here. Let's take a quick stop at Visio. Notice that we haven't refreshed anything yet, so let's now do that. Click Refresh, and task 9 has changed color to indicate that it's now in progress. Close that. Let's save the change that's in this VDW diagram type that's stored at SharePoint, and let's finally go back to SharePoint. Still no change here. That's appropriate until I click the Refresh button. And now task 9 is the alternate color. If I applied different data graphics, if I, many of the kinds of changes I can make in my Visio drawing will be reflected here. So again, think once more about the power this gives you. Anyone with a web browser can view a dynamic rendering of your Visio drawing. All right, I think that's the important things I wanted to say about Visio services, with one exception. What I have done here is taken the entire Visio drawing and made it available on a SharePoint web page. But you can actually embed this diagram as a web part in a SharePoint web page. So if you have other things that you'd like to show in conjunction with this Visio drawing, great, you can just drop this Visio drawing in a web part, and you can even have some interaction between web parts. So I can make a change in my Visio diagram or select a shape in my Visio diagram and have that cause something to change in another web part on the same SharePoint web page. That's a little bit beyond the scope of what I'm going to show you today, but I do want to mention that that's possible. There's lots of good documentation at the Visio website I'll show you in a couple of minutes that allows you to take advantage of that capability. All right, back to Visio and into the final part of the demonstration for today. What I'm going to do is go to my last diagram for the day, and that is this one. This is a SharePoint workflow diagram. Let me zoom in. And by the way, I've been doing this quite a bit today. Many of you are probably familiar with this keyboard shortcut. Let me go back to the full page view. If you hold down both the Control and Shift keys, the cursor changes to a magnifying glass. And if you then drag a box around a portion of the page, when you let go of the mouse button, Visio will zoom in on that section of the page that you highlighted. So hold down Control Shift and use and then draw a bounding box. You can also Control Shift left click to zoom in and right click to zoom out, as I think I mentioned earlier. This is a SharePoint workflow diagram created using the SharePoint workflow template. Now, where is it? If I go to File, New, and look in the flowchart category, then we see the BPMN diagram here, and here's the SharePoint workflow diagram. Because creating this diagram is no different than any other diagram, you drag shapes onto the page, I'm not going to spend a lot of time building the diagram for you. I'll just use this existing one. But I do want to show you that we have a wide variety of SharePoint actions in the Actions stencil. We've got a variety of conditions. does this data source equal that data source, or is this user permission set to a certain level? Was this date created, or this object created within a certain date span? And we have two terminators, start and terminate, nothing particularly exciting there, but all of those shapes are available for creating and defining your SharePoint workflow. The idea then is I've got a simple document update workflow in this particular case. I check an item out of my library. I check to see whether it's older than 1 year. If it is, I revise it and update it, and then I check it back in. On the other hand, if it's not older than a year, then I just check it back in. We assume it's okay. Now, what value does the SharePoint workflow bring? A couple of things. First, let me do this. Let me remove the text from this link. Now, it looks like just an ordinary arrow, but watch what happens when I go to the Process tab and try to export this diagram to Visio. It says the workflow diagram must be correct before we can export it. Click OK, and that issues window that we saw earlier in validating a flowchart opens. Now with this window open, we can see, oh, you know what? This highlighted arrow needs to be labeled with either yes or no. So SharePoint workflows are set up such that a decision must have a yes outcome and a no outcome. If I go back to this arrow and just type no, then rerun the check diagram, the diagram validation is complete. No issues were found in the current document. So the very nice thing from my standpoint is that you cannot export an invalid SharePoint workflow. So Visio will enforce that it is correct before you export it. And now what do we do? Well, let's actually export it. Click Export. I'm going to go to that test map SharePoint workflow site, and I will save this as a document workflow. Notice the VWI, that's the Visio Workflow Interchange format, a new format with Visio 2010 that is recognized both by Visio and SharePoint. And now when I save that, if we go back and look at the SharePoint site, we'll see that, let's go back to the Shared Documents folder, and sure enough, here's my document workflow. So I have saved that Visio file as a SharePoint object, and now what I could do is open it in SharePoint Designer, finish defining the workflow, make changes to it. I could even add steps or remove steps, anything I'd like, and then I can execute it in SharePoint Workflow. The nice thing is that if I go back to Visio, or another nice thing I should say, is there's an import button here. If I click the import button and point to that file, or any other file with that VWI extension, Visio will import it. If it's different than it was before, it will redraw it to lay out the additional steps or deleted steps. So this is a full round trip. Create the workflow graphically in Visio, save it, open it in SharePoint Designer, finish it, revise it, and then execute it. And then I can bring it back in if I want to. So I hope that gives you a good idea about what's possible with SharePoint Workflow. I'm going to wrap up now with a couple of final slides. I want to show you some places to go to get more information about Visio 2010. If you're interested in getting technical help, then Microsoft Answers is the place to go for any Microsoft product. There is not a separate section of Microsoft Answers specifically for Visio. Visio actually is a subset of the Office product area, but this link will take you to that subset. So that will offer you the opportunity to have your questions answered by many of my fellow Visio MVPs as well as other people who are active in answering questions at that location. At MS Visio is the Twitter handle, so if you want to follow MS Visio, there's the group at Microsoft in the marketing department is really good about posting all kinds of tips and tricks and very useful, helpful hints, links to other Visio sources of information. So I would highly recommend, if you use Twitter actively, that you might want to follow at MS Visio. There is a Visio page on Facebook as well, just facebook.com/Microsoft Visio. And there's also a very active Visio enthusiasts group at LinkedIn. If you take a look at that, you'll find that there are many active discussions, some started by folks at Microsoft, some started by other MVPs like myself, others started by just anybody who pops up and asks a question. Some of them are simple question and answer threads. Some of them get into much more interesting discussions, longer discussions about various topics related to Visio and ways in which Visio can be used. Other than that, great place to start is visio.microsoft.com, and among other things you'll find at this link. In fact, let's just click on it and take you to that page. One of the things you'll find is a 60-day free trial that is available at the main page. Now, actually, it looks like my hyperlink took me to the second place I was going to show you, which is the MVP sessions. Quick aside about that. This is a series of 24 videos that two of my colleagues, other fellow MVPs, and I recorded in December. Microsoft is releasing these 5 to 7 minute videos, one per week, and we're up to, I think it's 15 now. Let's scroll down to the bottom here. So you'll see every Tuesday there's a new 5 to 7 minute video released about a specific topic related to Visio 2010. I think you'll find them to be definitely informative and possibly even a little bit entertaining. I can't guarantee that. That's up to you. But let me go to where I started, which is visio.microsoft.com. And this is the main Visio page at Microsoft now. You'll find that you can buy a copy, of course, but here's where you can download that 60-day free trial. There are lots of other links here as well. Back to my slide. The MVP sessions, I already mentioned those. The software development kit, if you're interested in getting inside Visio and making Visio do intriguing things with code, you can download the software development kit. There are lots of code examples in both Visual Basic, C#, and other languages, as well as documentation that will help you in building a Visio solution. My book is available at visiostepbystep.com. There's certainly information there about it, including getting an autographed copy if you're interested. And if you're interested in reaching me after this session, an email to scott@visio2010stepbystep.com will reach me. And with that, I thank you. I'll turn it back over to Greg, who's going to give away 5 copies of my book as part of his closing comments. Take it away, Greg.
All right. Thank you, Scott, very much. I appreciate you coming down and sharing your expertise with our members and helping folks to figure out how they can leverage some existing assets that they may have, but also providing a nice overview of Visio 2010 Premier functionality and why folks may want to consider that. Part of our promotion for this particular webcast is that we're going to raffle off 5 copies of Scott's book, Visio 2010. We'll notify those folks before the end of the week, and thank everybody for their participation. So Scott Helmers, Vice President and Partner at Harvard Computing Group. Thank you, Scott, for your time today. I also wanted to thank the folks at Microsoft for hosting the webcast and Visio Premier 2010. For those of you that are located in the Midwest, we look forward to seeing you face-to-face at our upcoming Brainstorm Chicago. That'll be the week of May 7th. And for folks out on the West Coast, Brainstorm San Francisco will be the last week of June, starting with the 25th. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and we look forward to hosting you in an upcoming webcast.